Good evening and welcome to Merit TV Canada's election coverage. My name is David Craig as we keep coming to you every day regarding our election that we are in, the snap election. We as Canadians find ourselves moving towards that. We all will be voting on April. Well, not all of us, but hopefully we can set record numbers this year with Canadians going to the polls on April 28th. You know, we got a great show lined up for you. I'm excited to be able to chat with a friend, Lindsay Keith, out of the U.S. She is Merit TV's White House correspondent, and she's got some great insights into what's happening behind the scenes in regards to Canada, U.S., trade tensions, tariff, President Trump. So we'll hear from her in just a little bit. Before we get to her, I want to give you some updates on some things that have been happening in the last couple of days. I want to start off with Pierre Poilievre. He has been quoted by stating liberals are using Trump as a distraction from their disastrous record over the last 10 years. Pierre Poilievre is still continuing on in the same fashion that he has been all election campaign. He has been consistent with his messaging, things that they are running on. So it's important to see that. It's also important to see Mark Carney. He's starting to use language that Canada is at war, not a trade dispute, but we are at war with the Americans. And this is something that we need to unify as Canadians together to fight against the threat. Mark Carney is running on this idea, and Canadian unity seems to be resonating with Canadians as well as he continues to take a lead in the polls, as the polls are representing what is currently happening across Canada. We'll find out on April 28th whether that is actually true or not, or whether the ground campaign that the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre have established is actually going to be represented at the polls. It's important when remembering and looking at the polls. It's not just about what we think is popular. It's also important about how the seats actually measure up. What's going to happen? The Conservatives, over the next couple of weeks, remaining 2 weeks, they have to focus. If they want to be able to see themselves catch up, they have to focus on Ontario. They have to be able to swing key battleground areas to get back in their favor as they focus. But we'll be seeing this evening, right now, as we are about to be experiencing right after the show, the debate, the National Leaders Debate, which is the English version. We had the French version last night, but that's going to be coming up right after this, and that's going to have a huge impact on public opinion. I do think that's going to have an impact on how people go to the polls, because we're going to have a chance to see which party has got policy that we agree with, which party is actually presenting good ideas, which party is maybe just regurgitating old ideas and maybe they haven't been working. I think we all can say and look at the stats that what we've been seeing and what we've been walking through the last 10 years has not put Canada in a strong position. So the question is, do you want more of that? Or do you want something different? If that requires something different, then we have to move a different direction. A couple things that's gone under the radar the last couple of days. Bank of Canada has released several reports. The biggest one that happened yesterday was that they are holding the interest rates right now. They are not moving it. But the real story behind that is there's really no good news that's happening in our economy in Canada. That's why they're holding the rates. I think they're waiting to see what continues to unfold. There's obviously massive uncertainty as we walk through tariff talk and trade talk with the U.S. But we do have to remember is that tariffs is not the only threat of what we are facing right now. We have to look at within ourselves. I've been saying this, I think, over and over again, that we do have to have the ability as Canadians. I think it's going to take a lot of conviction on our side to look at what has caused us to get into a position where we are economically vulnerable. And then policies that the Conservatives or the Liberals are proposing, are they going to make us or put us into a position of strength where we're no longer in this position? That is something we are going to have to weigh. I really hope after this program at the Leaders Debate that Mark Carney will hear more about what his policies are going to be. Are they going to be a change of direction from what the Liberals have done for the last 10 years? Pierre Poilievre, is he going to expand upon his ideas? I know there's several things that they've stated, like they're going to be zero capital gains tax on reinvestment. There's going to be no sales tax on new homes. These are things to obviously stimulate and help Canadians. They're also going to, they aim to cut income tax by 15%. That's a big margin. They also want to train 350,000 new trades. They want to create an east-west pipeline. They also want to cut taxes on seniors that are working seniors that earn $34,000 or less. See, these are all things that are good things, that are incentives for Canadians that will help put money in the pockets of Canadians. But I'm looking for some real plans that's going to help catalyze industry in Canada, that's going to help re-attract investment into our industries, whatever industry you pick. What policies are coming forth? What is their actual plan that's going to make this happen in our country? Because trade talks and tariff talks, that's a big deal. We are married at the hip. We are connected at the hip with the U.S. This will smooth itself out. We will figure out a way forward. Which leader do you think is going to be the best one to deal with this as we move forward? Lots of other countries are going to the table to meet with President Trump, but Canada, we have not yet. We've been doing reciprocal tariffs. We are talking about, both major parties have the same stance of fighting tariff for tariff and showing strength. And is that the right approach? Is that the right direction that we need to go? I personally, in my opinion, do not think that is. I do not think it's wise to go up against the largest economy in the world when we are in a vulnerable state. We want to maintain a strong relationship to help build Canada and to move forward. That involves having a great relationship with President Donald Trump. It involves also coming to the table to be able to pull our weight in areas that we haven't. Is our parties going to be presenting that? Are they running on that? Or are they just using slogans to try to convince you they can make life better for you? All these things we have to be aware of, but we're going to find out a lot more right after this program's done as we move into the leadership debate. But we'll be right back in just a moment with Lindsay Keith. Stick with us. Well, welcome back to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch on our road to Election Day on April 28th. I'm really happy to have Lindsay Keith join us today, who is Merit TV, our American counterpart, political director and White House correspondent. Lindsay, thank you for taking the time for chatting with us today.
David, it's so great to be with you, and I love this collaboration with Merit TV USA and Merit TV Canada. What an amazing time.
Well, this has been a little bit of a long time coming. We've been working at building this relationship, and as we get to continue out what's happening in Canada, you're focused on in the U.S., and we find ourselves right now with obviously being neighbors. We are essentially, U.S. and Canada are kind of quote-unquote married in a lot of ways, but we're kind of walking through maybe what some might deem a little bit of a rough patch, whether there's some hurdles we have to get over and figure out how we get through it. I want to hear your thoughts, because as we're going through this, tariffs are a massive theme in Canada. President Donald Trump, and when he speaks about Canada and the relationship and trade, and obviously worldwide tariffs that they're negotiating as they go on, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, and also if you've got general thoughts about maybe what Americans think. What are they hearing? What are you thinking? What are you seeing when it comes to Canada, this trade relationship, tariff talk? Want your perspective. What's going on?
Yeah, it's interesting, David, because I think what Donald Trump did when he came into the White House really shocked a lot of people as it pertained to our largest trade partners and our neighbors and our friends, like
Yep.
Canada and Mexico, and specifically you all in Canada, because, President Trump was very clear on the campaign trail this last cycle that he was going to utilize tariffs once again, as he did in his first term. He says
Hmm.
he loves the word
Yes.
tariffs,
Yeah.
and he talks about it's one of the most beautiful words in the English dictionary. But really, when we saw in his first term, he used tariffs very much with a targeted approach, going after different manufacturing industries, or specifically going after countries like China to essentially grow industries in the US or to penalize countries like China. But this time around, he's really taken a much more broad approach, making it a part of his economic plan as a whole. What we're seeing play out in real time right now, Japan is actively at the White House today,
Yeah.
in the US, having these negotiations. But President Trump never talked about putting tariffs on Canada on the campaign trail. It wasn't until the transition period that he flagged this, and then Prime Minister at the time, Justin Trudeau, actually came down,
That's
you'll
right.
remember,
That's
many
right.
people did, went to Mar-a-Lago to have this conversation with the president, and it seemed like that went well. It seemed like even for some of the, tough relationships they'd had at the time, they had a respectful relationship because he had been the prime minister, in Trump's first term, and people thought it was all going to get worked out. And that's really not what we saw happen. It wasn't until we saw Claudia Sheinbaum, president of Mexico, make a deal
That's right.
with the president, then Justin Trudeau was able to make a deal with the president. And so that kind of, was, I think, a surprise to so many American people. Why are we slapping our allies and our friends in the face? Like, I thought you were going to use tariffs, in a different way like you did last time. And so that really was a wake up call that most people didn't hear so much on the campaign trail. It wasn't until that transition period before he came president. And then we saw what he did once he came to the Oval Office. So I would say most Americans were really surprised by that move. You even had Republicans in Congress, mostly senators, Republican senators who are on border states with Canada, speak up and say, this is not a smart move.
Yeah.
Tariffs don't help the American consumer. They don't help anybody. And they were very vocal, many of them, even signing onto a piece of legislation, or really a resolution rather, that said that they would stop these tariffs from going into place in Canada. It passed in the Senate 51-48, which for those who aren't familiar, Republicans have the majority in the Senate. So there definitely was this disdain of why are we doing this? But President Trump, I think once he brokered that 30-day pause, people thought, okay, maybe you are willing to negotiate here. And the White House really came back, David, and talked about how it was all about fentanyl. And that was the purpose of these specific tariffs, which, that has been something that has plagued America now and killed so many Americans. And so I think that satiated a lot of people's concerns. But then it was when they would hear the numbers of what was coming out of
Yes,
Canada,
right.
they were like, it's a fraction of what's coming through Mexico. And obviously, these pharmaceuticals and these chemicals are being made in China. And so it was like, I understand putting a tariff on China and Mexico, but maybe not so much Canada. This doesn't make sense. But I feel like this story has also been lost in some ways until recent days, because after President Trump on April 2nd put these broad sweeping tariffs across the world, that has become the story. And part of the story that was Mexico and Canada has been lost a little
That's
bit
right.
more. And so I think Americans are not as tuned in as they were to that
Okay.
relationship right now, because now it's about their bottom dollar, opposed to why are we not being so kind to our allies and our friends?
Interest Yeah, well, it's almost the opposite up here in Canada. It is top line, it's headlines every day. In fact, it's probably the main policy, and policy is the wrong word, the main slogan, the main mantra of the Liberal Party and Mark Carney as they're running forward about unifying Canada. We must unite. He's got a slogan of elbows up. It's a hockey reference about the threat from the south of the border, tariffs, and
Like, let's
even
fight.
yeah, exactly. And that's the idea. And that is actually having an impact on Canadians of unifying. You're seeing a little bit of this unity come through because at the same time, we've got some big regional divide that's happening. You have Alberta, which is the energy central, where energy is really centralized here in Canada, is in Alberta. You've got different issues that are happening across the country, but this message seems to be resonating. But I'm concerned. I'm going to ask you a question in a second. I'm concerned because I actually think this tariff talk is a little bit of a distraction. If you could look into the reason being, I'll tell you my theory, a little bit of a distraction because Canada has actually been in an economically weak position, not because of Trump and the tariffs. It's been a decade or longer of bad policy, mismanagement of our finances, similar idea of ballooning debt, not getting our energy out like we could. The thing I'm pointing at here is as we move towards this election, our current prime minister and also the leader of the Conservative Party, they're running on this. We need to fight tariff for tariff against the United States. We need to go up against, which you guys are the superpower, the largest economy in the world. And Canada, we need to fight them. And it's interesting when Trump said the 90-day pause on all tariffs, or by bringing them down to 10%. Canada, I do not believe, was included on that because we
That's
were
right.
retaliating. Do you think President Donald Trump would be favorable to Canada if there was a different approach of coming to the table like
Mm.
President of Mexico did? Because we have not done that yet.
I think so. I mean, it's a good point. We have seen the White House say multiple times that these reciprocal tariffs that were put into place on April 2nd were non-negotiable,
Mhm.
really. And then they've changed course a bit and said, okay, there's always room for negotiation.
Hmm.
And, they have now 70 plus countries coming to the negotiating table. And it was just this week that the White House has been asked this so many times as it pertains to China, who now has absorbed a 145% tariff on them. Um, they came out just this week and said, we are waiting for China to come to us. We're not going to them. They have to make the first call. And so it's kind of who's going to blink first. And this is kind of Trump's negotiating style. He wants to be approached. He's not going to chase you. He knows that he is the world's number one economy. And his mindset is, we don't need you. You need us. We help your economy thrive. So, what are you going to bring to the table for America? And that's really how he's approached a lot of these negotiating tactics that we've seen so far. And it happened, with Canada and the fentanyl and the original 25% that was put in place. I think Justin Trudeau put fentanyl czar in place. You guys put
That's right.
additional troops on the border and said that you would take this issue really seriously. And so I think he's looking for the same approach here. What are you going to do? What are you going to bring to the table that is going to be lucrative for the American economy? And his whole concept on these tariffs, like I said, that it's his economic policy is that he wants to bring trade deficits down across the globe, and he feels like Americans been treated poorly and unfairly for decades now. And, last thing I'll say on this point, you do listen to this isn't new for President Trump. Even decades ago, 35 years ago, he was saying these
That's
things
right.
on camera. And so no one thought it would be this broad. And like I said, our friends, because the White House has been clear that their goal is to isolate China through all these different tariffs. So the question is Canada willing to have a conversation, or is it this fight? And we've seen how they've treated China so far, that it's like, if you fight and if you retaliate, there will be consequences. They've said that
See.
Yeah.
themselves. And so I do think they really want to see people come and approach them. That's what they're looking for.
Interesting. No, that's a great thought. I want to hear your thoughts on. We only have a couple minutes left here, but I believe within the last 2 weeks, President Donald Trump made a comment about he'd rather, and this is my paraphrase version, he'd rather deal with the liberals as opposed to Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservatives. He made a comment stating that I think he used the word, it was stupid that Pierre is not coming more towards Trump.
Mhm.
And a lot of Canadians took that as an endorsement of Liberal leader Mark Carney. That president, even though it was not an official endorsement at all, he was saying, what are your thoughts on why he made comments like that? Is there any deeper thoughts behind that? I know you can't read Donald Trump, you can't speak for him, but just curious from that perspective, because that made its rounds up here in Canada, those comments.
Yeah, it's interesting. Two things I'll say. One of the reasons that Donald Trump won the election, amongst many, is that a lot of the middle class who he won the working class man for a Republican for the first time in a very long time
Hmm.
is because he speaks his mind and he says
Yeah.
stuff sometimes that you're like, I can't believe you just said that.
Okay.
You never know what's going to come out of his mouth
Sure.
or that he's going to put on True Social. I also think he seems to have a good relationship with Mark Carney, even though it doesn't seem to be a pre-existing relationship. And I think it's because it's almost businessman to
Hmm.
businessman, somebody who understands finance, they understand global trade, they understand, and he respects people who can speak his language in a way. And so I think that there is a mutual respect there, even though there's been some tough language from Mark Carney as well. And he continues to say he wants to annex Canada. Um, I think for him, something that people don't understand sometimes, David, and it gets, I think, lost in translation. Love him or hate him, President Trump has a unique sense of humor,
Hmm.
and some people don't realize sometimes that he's joking, and it's even hard for us here in the US. Was that a joke or was that real? And when he's talked about annexing to Canada, some people thought that was a joke when he was calling Justin Trudeau the governor. Um, and so it's sometimes he runs with jokes and you don't know. Um, but at the end of the day, I do feel like he has a mutual respect for Mark Carney and he can see himself working with him in the long run because it's somebody who understands finance, trade, in a different, unique way as he does. And I think that's really important to him. Relationships are important to him, even though he plays the tough guy. He likes behind closed doors. I've spent time with him in different scenarios. you would never know that he's this rough, tough guy sometimes and uses this language. He's actually such a kind person generally, and he said this, himself, "I'm willing to find ways to negotiate. I'm willing to be flexible." But I think it goes back to your original question. He wants to see that someone wants to come to the
Hmm.
table and is willing to almost humble themselves to do so.
Yeah, interesting. No, I think I would agree with you on that. That would be my interpretation. Even actually recently, Bill Maher, comedian Bill Maher, made comments about having dinner with him and saying he was actually very surprised about how jovial and lovely and
Yes.
conversational and laughing he was. So I do think there's some interesting, it's going to be very fun to watch how this relationship goes forth. We're obviously tied at the hip. It's just, as I said earlier,
Yes.
it's a rough patch and we'll figure it out as Canada figures out our things. But Lindsay, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, you guys, for joining us as we continue on to April 28th, Election Watch here at Merit TV Canada. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Merit TV Canada's election coverage. What a great chat with Lindsay Keith. I'm sure it gave you maybe some insight into what's happening behind the scene from the American perspective. I can actually jump on the things that she was saying as I've been down in the States several times over the last month or so. And every time people find out I'm Canadian, I have been told this over and over again. You guys are our friends. You're still our friends. We still love Canada. It's funny how much Americans have felt the need to say that. Before, I've traveled the States a lot over my lifetime, and I haven't felt that before as opposed to now. So there is that sentiment that's going on. It's interesting to think of, is there strategy? Obviously, I think there is strategy behind Donald Trump in his way that he's working, but there also is something to be said about Canada and the fact that we are fighting tariff for tariff and being reciprocal and not coming to the proverbial table, or the literal table actually, with Donald Trump to negotiate when other countries are coming to the table. So that's something that we really are going to have to look at, but I so appreciate her thoughts on what was going on. One thing I want to bring your attention to just as we come to a close. We've talked a little bit about in the past about regional divide. We know that there seems to be a rising sentiment in Alberta about independence, separatism, the fact of what is Alberta going to do if the Liberals get in? What are they going to do if the Conservatives get in and they can't get an east-west pipeline going? Quebec, obviously for years and years, there's been the sentiment about separation and Quebec leaving Canada. But it's interesting. I want to bring that up because there was a National Post poll that came out, an article just in the last day or so that was conducted specifically asking voters within the Bloc Québécois and asking them about their Canadian pride. And it was an overwhelming majority of the voters that they polled said they are so proud to be Canadian. That's interesting. It's a little bit of a different narrative from some of that separatist talk that we have heard as well. There's been a new recent poll that was published by National Post about Albertans. And Albertans are more proud of Canada than they are their province. Again, it's just a poll. It represents a small amount of people. But is there a larger truth to be said here? I know there is. I've witnessed it personally in Alberta. But is the media making this idea of independence larger than what it is? I'm honestly not sure. I've been hearing a lot more about it from being on the ground and connecting with Albertans. We're seeing it a lot more through different social platforms and the growth of that. No doubt is it rising. But is it that big? That's the question I think it's going to be really interesting to see as we move towards the polls. Are Albertans done with Canada, or is that something that is just a small group? I personally don't know where I land on that just yet, but that's something that we're going to have to watch for as we move towards this. But keep joining us at Merit TV Canada as we continue to follow the election and election coverage as we move towards April 28th. You can vote this weekend. Just a reminder for the upcoming polls. We'll see you guys next time.